The Trans Industry with Fiamengo, Golden, Buchanan, and Lofendale. Men are good, as are you. Indeed, men are good, as are you, and as is Janice Fiamengo. And here, the four of us are gathered once again, and I want to introduce you quickly to each of them. Mike Buchanan is the co-founder of the ICMIs and is the founder of the Justice for Boys and Men Party, which I think, Mike, is the only party in the world that stands up for boys and men. Is that right?
Since we launched in 2013, Tom, the only party campaigning for the human rights of men and boys in the English-speaking world, and the only avowedly anti-feminist political party in the English-speaking world.
Bravo to both. And Don Lofendale is with us, and Don is a frequent presenter at the ICMIs, whom we love dearly. He's always got some interesting perspectives on things. He's a lawyer from Canada. And we have Janice Fiamengo, of course, the creator of the Fiamengo File 1 and Fiamengo File 2, which I would highly recommend you have a look at because it is fascinating. Anyway, and as always, Janice has a perspective that most of us haven't really thought of yet. So go see her Fiamengo Files, and I'm Tom Golden, and I'm at menargood.locals.com. And yeah, most of my material is there now. It's not on YouTube. It's not on the web anymore. It's only on local. So come see me there. Today we're going to talk about the trans industry. Janice, can you get us started?
Yes, thank you, Tom. The trans industry. I think it's fair to say that there are various movements in the 20th and early 20th centuries, various social movements that feminism has managed to incorporate and take under its wing. If we could think about the environmentalist movement, we could think about the gay rights movement, the disability movement, anti-racism, anti-colonialism, all of those feminism has managed to, you could say, colonize and has turned into an arm of the feminist movement. The one movement that it may be true that feminism hasn't quite managed to take control over is the trans movement. Although it is intimately related to feminism, it's the one movement that I think has managed to push feminism back on its heels. And so we are now witnessing an interesting phenomenon whereby feminists themselves are finding themselves in the position of being censored on the big tech platforms, being in some cases actually charged with hate speech for stating biological facts about men and women, and finding themselves charged with, in general terms, being exclusionary and not caring about equality. The very same kinds of charges that many feminists have brought against men when they tried to state biological facts or protect their own spaces, feminists themselves now are having to experience this very unpleasant kind of mobbing. So that's an interesting factor. And I think one of the things about the trans movement that has been so interesting, and we're of course especially interested in it as it affects men and boys, and as it exposes elements of feminist ideology, I think one of the things that's most interesting is that the trans ideology, in which one's felt experience of gender trumps biological reality. The trans movement has exposed the internal incoherencies and falsehoods of feminist ideology, and it has also exposed the double standards of feminist ideology. So I hope we can talk about some of these issues today. I guess I would want to start by saying that what has struck me most powerfully over the last couple of years, as there has developed a decided split within the feminist movement between those feminists who are very supportive of trans ideology, who claim that trans women are women, and who have simply broadened the feminist umbrella to include trans women, that is, men who are transitioning or have transitioned into women. There are those feminists, and there are also TERFs, trans exclusionary feminists, or sometimes they call themselves gender critical feminists, who reject these people and who are very, very angry and upset, sometimes framing the issue as a patriarchal takeover of women's bodies and women's spaces. One of the things that I find most interesting about the debate is the fact that the latter category of feminists, those who protest the danger to women and the usurpation of women's bodies by men, that they are quite blind to the fact that feminist theory itself is absolutely bedrock and fundamental to trans ideology. If it hadn't been for absolutely decades of feminist theory claiming that gender is a social construct, that pretty well everything that matters about male female differences is actually produced through social conditioning. Without that, it would have been impossible to imagine the trans movement as it looks today. And yet, that is something that is persistently denied by these feminist critics of trans, who keep claiming that this is merely an ingenious way, the latest way that men have found to colonize women and to continue to exert control and terrorize women. So I think that's quite interesting in itself, and
Yes, it
and
is.
anyone who doesn't realize the extent to which this is true should take a look at some of the founders of second wave feminism, such as Kate Millett. I mean, this goes even further back to Simone de Beauvoir and her 1949 tract, The Second Sex, in which she has, an entire segment of the book claiming that social conditioning is all, one is not born but rather becomes woman, that everything that happens to a girl from the earliest experiences to right up until womanhood conditions her to accept her inferiority, both physically and emotionally and psychologically. If you look at Kate Millett's 1970 book Sexual Politics, she deals extensively with the idea that gender is primarily a product of social forces that train up a girl to accept her inferiority, and that was the standard line of feminism for decades.
Yes.
And so when we now get to this point to hear feminists saying that there is a biological difference that needs to be recognized between the two sexes, and that not to recognize it actually does harm to women and girls, the irony is quite tremendous. So there's a certain satisfaction in witnessing that. Unfortunately, the damage to truth and to common sense social norms that the trans phenomenon, or at least the extreme end of the trans phenomenon, does takes away the satisfaction of
Yes.
witnessing the hypocrisy of feminism being exposed. So I guess that would be my opening statement.
Boy, we could stop right there.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're still focused on everything is socially constructed. They still keep that up, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. The book that you showed me the other day, Janice, about the girls and sports, and how the whole thing was constructed. That if only girls had had the same kind of social upbringing boys had, they'd be able to do just as well. In fact, maybe be better.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh
Yes.
my gosh.
Yeah, that was a standard series of propositions by feminism up until very recently. That's a 2011 book. There's a chapter called "The Socially Constructed Body" by these two sociologists. They make that claim extensively, quoting from many other scholars, that from the time that they are very young girls learn to move differently, A girl is told that she throws like a girl, and therefore she learns to throw like a girl, allegedly. Girls aren't encouraged, allegedly, by their parents and by those around them to move in the same way that boys are. They're not encouraged to be aggressive in the same way that boys are. So although they admit that there are some biological sex differences, they see the primary difference is that girls are simply not encouraged to be as athletic as in their bodies as men are. And this is still a line taken by there's a professor of sport, I think Purdue University. Her name is actually Cookie or Cookie, Cooky.
I like Cookie.
And she makes the same kinds of claims, that essentially the idea that women are weaker than men is an idea that's been used to subordinate women, including women's sports.
Yes.
And she argues that even in the way male-female sports are covered, that often, for example, sports commentators are less enthusiastic about women's sports.
Of course.
And they give it a less serious treatment. They tend to focus on women's attractiveness rather than on women's strength and power.
Wonder why.
And elaborate arguments about all the ways in which female sports are denigrated by sports analysts and commentators, and that is the reason why women can't actually compete on a level playing field with male athletes, and that if only the coverage changed, that the sports teams would perform differently. It is quite remarkable.
Yes.
And this woman has spent her career making those kinds of arguments.
Yep.
And it isn't clear at all then why there should even be a separate sports category for women at all. If that's her belief, why not just open it up and have all 32 of the genders competing, together, and therefore there would be no more discrimination. She is actually a proponent of the trans phenomenon. She welcomes athletes like Leah Thomas in swimming. There's Emily Bridges in cycling. There's Fallon Fox in mixed martial arts. There's Caster Semenya in middle distance running. She accepts all these athletes as she sees them as striking a blow against the idea that women are weaker than men biologically. So she is a champion of the trans movement, but of course many other feminists are not.
Yes.
Yeah. So interesting fault lines are certainly being exposed in feminist theory.
Yes, and the quotes that we put up while Janice was talking were of the book that she was talking about. And I want to go back to this one just to see the very last line. The result is that even women's championship teams falter and fail. So the whole paragraph is talking about how they don't get the same media coverage, they don't get this, they don't get encouraged. Believing is seeing, and then they say that's why they fail. It's like, oh my gosh, just crazy stuff.
Yeah, it is, and that has been like that was a chapter in a college textbook that has been used in sociology courses across North America.
Oh man,
that has been the standard, allegedly the scientific line about gender that has been pumped out of universities for decades. So it's no wonder that so many people believe it.
Yes. And that same book talks about throwing like a girl. They were taught that they throw like a girl, so they didn't throw in the same way. But if you look at someone like David Geary, who wrote the male-female sex differences between men and women, look at what Geary says. By 2 to 4 years of age, more than 9 out of 10 boys can throw farther than the average girl. And by 17 years, only the most skilled girls can throw as far as the least skilled boys. And he goes on to talk about the differences are in the forearm, that men have longer ulnas and radii, and that gives them a higher capacity to be able to throw quickly and accurately. So it's like all kinds of biological things are going on that they just completely miss. They just completely, just everything's constructed. Oh, yes.
Yeah. There was a woman by the name of Alice Rossi who was a early 70s kind of stereotypical angry feminist. I read some of her stuff, but she had some intellectual honesty to her. She was no Janice Fiamengo, but she had something. And I recall it was a publication called Diadless. And in spring of 77, she wrote an article, not exactly recanting what she had said before, but sounding frankly much more rational and calm. And she entitled this article, The Missing Body in Sociology. So this is exactly along the lines of what Geary is saying now.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, I didn't follow her specifically, but I think she lost a lot of sway after that article.
Huh.
But here was someone who made an attempt to improve on her original view, and but got absolutely nowhere with it.
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder, is it perhaps time, Tom, to talk about the history of transgenderism,
Sure, Mike.
which is something that really fascinates me, and its relationship to feminism. I mean, here in the UK, possibly the best known transgender person in my lifetime, and I'm 64, is the author Jan Morris, who transitioned from James Morris, had surgery in Morocco in 1972, I think, so 50 years ago. And it seems that society, however nebulous that is, has trundled on, accepting that some people, a small minority of people, feel that they're, if you like, the opposite sex to their assigned birth, if we can use that expression. And it's only really in recent years that there's been much societal concern. I mean, for most of the last 50 years, the majority of transgendered people, or people undergoing surgery in particular, have been men.
Right.
And it seems that there was never much societal concern about men having their genitals removed. I mean, a very interesting phenomenon in recent years is that the majority of of transgenders, certainly in terms of reconstruction surgery, have been female.
Right.
And I
Right.
think in one of your articles, Janice, you say that you point to a psychology magazine, which says that today something over 80% of new transgender people are women. And I, I believe this is mainly due to a phenomenon that Charles Murray in Human Diversity calls rapid onset gender dysphoria, and he starts with this. This is a newly documented phenomenon that might not even have existed a decade ago. It's characterized by adolescents, mostly female, who show no signs of gender dysphoria as children and apparently abruptly decide they are transgender as teenagers, which is a really quite extraordinary thing. And he goes
Yes.
on to say that 83% of people in this category are female. So this is mainly teenage girls, and I think Jordan Peterson has talked about social contagion, and he describes the social media. They get together in groups, and rapidly self-identify as transgender, and it's really it's an extraordinary example of the empathy gap. I think that and again your latest article, Janice, really describes this very well. That there's empathy for, and quite rightly, for girls who may unnecessarily be having surgery as young as 16. There's never been, to my knowledge, any sympathy for boys and men who have their genitals removed.
There's something wrong with them.
Indeed, and they're often presented as, of course, as trans women as a threat
Yes.
to
Right.
women.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the only way they've ever been presented, as far as I'm aware. There's never been any discussion of why is it that a perfectly healthy man might decide to become a woman. And I'm not claiming any expertise on this, but certainly if we're talking about young people, it would not be at all surprising to me that the enormous anti-male animus in our culture would have something to do with it. If you hear from the time you're a very, very young boy that the future is female and that men are responsible for all the evils of the world and all the different slogans that we now have pouring out from popular culture about the superiority, the superior empathy, the superior intelligence, the superior leadership qualities of females, it wouldn't be surprising if that would play some role in a young man's decision that he would prefer to be a woman. But that there's never been any discussion of that. Trans women have always been looked at only through the lens of threat to women.
Right.
And
Right.
yes, it's just so remarkable that now, when it seems that, at least at the adolescent stage, a great number of those transitioning are actually girls transitioning to boys, that suddenly there are all this discussion and great empathy and concern about the decision. And I heard a discussion not too long ago. Well, actually, the discussion is from a couple of years ago, but it was a video that I just discovered recently between Candace Owens and a woman named Abigail Schreier, who has written a book on the subject specifically of teen girls transitioning to become boys. And yeah, there was a great deal of concern that this was because allegedly society wasn't affirming enough of femininity, that girls weren't being told that it was great to be a girl, it was great to have breasts, it was great to have the opportunity to become a mother. You know, there were all these biological realities that deserved to be celebrated, but somehow weren't being celebrated in our culture. And they even evoked that idea that this was a return of the patriarchy, a triumph of the patriarchy, rolling back the gains that women had made because women weren't being affirmed in their femaleness. And also, of course, there was the threat narrative about the other side, that these girls were at the same time not being protected from those boys, who are often referred to as men, not as boys, who were transitioning to femaleness and then taking over their spaces and, you know, ruining their sports and taking over femalehood altogether. So yeah, the determination always to see anything that men decide to do in terms of something that is aggressive, something that's predatory and dangerous, and always to understand anything that females do as something that results from their victimization, deserving of great concern and compassion, is really on full display when it comes to, it seems, almost all aspects of the trans issue.
And
It's
isn't it
amazing.
an astonishing angle that the claim that girls have not been told that it's great being a girl? I mean, they've heard
Yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
else.
That's crazy. What I don't understand is, okay, they're talking about the future is female. Why would any girl want to be a boy? Why would any girl want to be a man? I mean, men are toxic, right? Men are terrible. Men are
Yes.
this. Why is this rush to be masculine? I don't get it.
But
I think
the other
it
side of
had.
the sorry, Janice.
Oh, you go ahead, Mike, if you want.
No, I was just going to say the other side of the coin, of course, is that boys have heard nothing but how they're toxic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they get the messages
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
They go to
Exactly.
schools where almost all the teachers are women. I think also in your article, Janice, you pointed that there's been quite a spike in teenage boys' suicides.
Yes.
And I'd be surprised if the transgenderism issue hadn't been a contributor to that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I think actually feminist theory which has become more and more warped and bizarre as it's become more and more intersectional over the last couple of decades. I think it has a role to play in both female to male transgenderism and male to female transgenderism. It makes sense to us to see it in terms of male to female transgenderism because we've been very much aware of that whole narrative about how boys are no good. They are toxic. They need to take a step back. They need to step away from the power. They need to vote feminist women into positions of power. You know, they need to essentially just sit down and shut up and let their far superior sisters take over. But I think what we don't talk about so much, and maybe even don't pay so much attention to, is the fact that even within feminist theory and its celebration of the marginalized and the oppressed, what they now call cisgender femaleness is inferior to other oppressed identities. And there has been a great deal of talk about the intersectionality of oppression and how the preferred identities are those that can claim more characteristics of oppression. So if you are a Black woman, that is far more interesting and morally authentic than being a white woman, because if you're a white woman, you have to apologize for your white skin privilege. If you're a lesbian, you are morally more authentic and deserve to be listened to and empathized with more than if you're a heterosexual female. And trans is also an identity that has that kind of moral cachet. And so a lot of, especially I think, white girls are feeling the heat of that. And teenage girls of anyone are especially sensitive to these kinds of calibrations of status.
Yes.
And moral status that feminism is all about. It's all about who is most oppressed and therefore can speak the loudest and claim the most attention and moral authority. And a cisgender girl doesn't have as much moral authority as a trans person.
Right. That's a good point.
So again, that I think this drive to claim an oppressed identity plays a great role in why a lot of these girls are feeling uncomfortable in themselves. They're being asked to take on all the burden of guilt. It may be the burden of guilt of whiteness, of their cisgender identity, of their heterosexuality. All of those are now stigmatized according to feminist theory. They're things that one must apologize for. So I can well understand why some of these teenage girls want to escape all of that and into an identity that is perceived as morally pristine.
Yeah. And highly valued.
Yes, highly valued. It's a really sick, I mean, that is, and we've seen this from the male side, but this is happening on the female side too. It is a really sick ideology that elevates oppression to some kind of superior moral status. And so everybody wants to be able to claim that because it means you don't have to take on the burden of collective guilt that feminist ideology is all about. And
so
like
true.
Oddly enough, like boys have suffered from this for years, and we've been following that. But I think in a way, guys are better at handling it. Like guys, and we've seen this even in these studies of the fact that a lot of men and boys are still kind of, I mean, obviously there are many men and boys suffering, but like men and boys, they still have a sense of what it means to be themselves. They are, to some extent, able to shrug off some of the horrific, toxic propaganda that they hear. I think teenage girls are uniquely vulnerable to it. And they're now finding themselves the target of similar kind of toxic ideology. And so they're trying to escape it in this manner.
Yeah, and it's a new thing for them, whereas boys, it's been there for their entire lives. That's a good point.
If I might, I have 2 points to make. One is to pick up on Janice's comment about while a lot of men and boys are suffering, lots of suicide and depression and things like that, that a significant number of men and boys have been able to, if not entirely thrive, healthily survive and develop. And one example of that, to my mind, is the study that has demonstrated that since at least the 1970s, some suggestion since the 1950s, there's been the happiness change forms an X, with females being happiest in the 50s and going downhill today, notwithstanding the tremendous gains, and men being less happy then in the sort of the 50s to 70s and getting like nothing but happier. And it was Steve Brule, I believe, who pointed out that, well, one of the big things going on in that time is less marriage. And, the supposedly oppressive marriage, bad deal for women, great deal for men, as that has faltered, women have become kind of miserable and men have gotten happier. And, like just that fact alone ought to make us kind of rethink,
Pause.
right? Like, yeah, pause as to how things
Yeah.
really were. The other point I wanted to make, you guys were talking about things like the empathy gap, double standards, stereotyping, or rather, the specific example was male to female transition. Nobody really cared if guys got their genitals chopped off, but if there is a concern, it's that these guys are predatory. And the thing that occurred to me a while back is that the feminist fabrication of the largely mythical oppressive patriarchy leads to constant stereotyping and double standards. Those two things are allowed or encouraged, validated by that myth, because that's always the answer, right? Oppressive patriarchy.
I would say hatred too, overt expressions of hatred. Certainly in the last couple of decades, Steve Brule, we just mentioned, he was talking about this just the other day, that like they don't even try to. I would say many feminists and even many women actually now feel that they've been given a license to hate, and they
Right.
don't even feel the need to hide it anymore. They used to say, "Oh no, we don't hate men," and then they said, "Oh, we don't hate men, but it wouldn't matter if we did." And now they just come right out and say, "Yeah, we do hate men, and we have every right to do so."
Why can't we hate
And
men?
it's
Yeah.
it's another one of the delicious ironies of the trans movement and its determination to censor gender critical or TERF feminists, is that after saying that, for so long they felt that they had every right to be hateful, and now, surprise surprise, they're being told that they're hateful, merely for saying that a man cannot be a woman, and vice versa. So yeah.
Exactly. If I might validate that perception or your view, Janice, your insight even further, as some of you guys might recall, I was the first male feminist that I knew. Second half of first year university, 18 years old. So that would have been beginning of 1972. It lasted for about a year and a half. And I left the philosophy because I could tell it was a hate and hypocrisy based supremacist movement.
Yes.
Nowhere near as obvious and bad as now, but it was there then already, and that's why I left.
Right.
It was not real, and if you looked at it hard, you could see it back then even, and it's of course gotten nothing but progressively worse and more
Amen
extreme.
to that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just staying on the subject of men hating, that brings me naturally to Julie Bindel,
Yes.
a British lesbian radical feminist. who in 2018 did a piece, or wrote a piece, recommending as holiday reading for her readers, for her followers, Valerie Solanas' The Scum Manifesto. The Society of Cutting Up Men. This is the deranged woman who shot and nearly killed Andy Warhol.
Right.
Yeah.
And Julie Bindle's whole thing was basically, this is a perfectly reasonable thing to be advocating, because men have done such awful things to women. She also is I think probably by some way, well, she's certainly among the most prominent British TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists. Although I guess J.K. Rowling is more famous to the general public. But time and again in the mainstream media, I read including the Daily Mail, a supposedly conservative newspaper, articles by Julie Bindle complaining about having been cancelled.
Yeah.
Well, cancelled as much as Julie Bindle. She even when she's cancelled, she gets more exposure than the entirety of the world's MRAs over the last 50 years. It's really quite an extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, cancel all the way to the mainstream media.
Yes. Just by the way, Mike, I took a psychology of women course in the 1974 to 1975 school year. My major was in psychology back then. The first part of the course was taught by a female professor who I would say displayed animus towards men. And even back then, while there was no in-depth study of it or anything like that, she made an approving reference to that manifesto. And yes, all the way back then. And her take, it's the strangest thing. It wasn't, I'll tell you what it wasn't, of course. It wasn't that, gee, maybe feminism has some problems, because look at how much hate at least some feminists have. It was more along the lines, you see how bad men must be, or otherwise a woman wouldn't have written a manifesto.
Yeah, the deep hatred underlying so much anti-trans activism is really cannot be overstated, I think. It's so, often I think feminists who have concerns about trans ideology have some legitimate concerns, especially about how children are being pressured into making these life-altering, life-damaging decisions well before they're ready to do so. It is startling to see how quickly young people can decide after just viewing a few videos, it seems, or talking to their friends that they want to completely change their bodies and themselves. It's quite terrifying, actually, to see.
Really, terrifying.
But yeah, it is, and so there are definitely legitimate concerns about what is being done to children as a result of what seems a concerted effort on the part of educators in the public schools and influencers and activists and even some in the medical profession to encourage children to think of their so-called gender identity as fluid. It's quite startling.
It's absolutely amazing.
It really is.
About one more thing about my experience, but there was a song I believe I heard, although I may have dreamed it, and it was in the late 1960s, and I recall it was a song where everything in this young man's world, was a male singer, like nothing makes any sense, everything's all mixed up. And the lyric that stuck with me, and I've always tried to find the song and lyric, and I never could, but he sings, "What's my name? What's my sex?" And the point, as I understood it, was that if you don't know that, you don't know anything. You are entirely unmoored from reality. And I think the trans fluid thing, even more than trans itself, gets to exactly that point. I might know my sex, but it's different every day, so you won't know my sex. But if you don't get it right, then you're sort of some sort of monstrous oppressor. And the whole thing too about it, if you go trans, you of course, it's horrible to be dead named. Someone call you by your original sex name rather than your now uh, n- n- uh, new name of the sex you've supposedly become. So both of those points, what's my name, what's my sex, are exactly what's going on with trans,
Yes.
including including trans, or particularly trans fluidity. And
Yes.
I saw a girl on YouTube who was complaining about her parents, or maybe even expressing some anger towards them, because 3 days before she had decided she was a boy, and her parents were still dead naming her. So it can get that extreme.
It's an attack on identity. I mean, this whole thing is an attack on identity, which, of course, is the fundamentals of brainwashing. I mean,
Yes,
they are making it so that children don't know who they are, with the
yes,
72 gender crap. I mean, that's what it is. And what's
Mm-hmm.
amazing to me is how it's promoted. The
yes,
Yeah.
schools are promoting this. The American
Mm-hmm.
Academy of Pediatrics is promoting this. I mean,
Yeah.
yes,
it's like
yes,
that's mind blowing.
yes.
Yeah.
E-
It really is.
Exactly. And if I might, this was the most fundamental point I wanted to make here, and you've just touched on it, Tom. It's identity as to who you really are. That's
Yes,
so crucial. Not to quote our eloquent friend, or to quote our eloquent friend Janice here, just from earlier in this discussion, felt experience trumps biological reality. And of course, that is exactly like correct as to what's going on, but it's exactly wrong. Biological reality ought to trump whatever feelings that one might have. And as
right.
you're saying, Tom, with brainwashing, if they can get us to believe that this stuff, they can get us to believe anything, it
Yep,
seems to me.
yep. I
Mm-hmm.
agree.
Well, I guess one of the things that is so striking, I mean, we all agree that it's one thing to be an adult and decide that one wants to live as, a different sex, as
Right,
Jan Morris did,
right.
for example.
Yes,
Yet the encouragement to children to believe that at age 8 they're actually something else, and the obvious concerted attempt to make children think about such things and to believe that it might quite be possible that they should change sex, or that they might be no sex at all, some kind of intersex
right,
person. There's so
right.
many other different identities.
Yes,
Um, these are very disturbing, and they are outgrowths of feminist and social justice ideology. And at the same time, it is amazing to think that various anti-trans activists cannot get past their hatred of men in order to talk about these issues as if they mattered in the same way to both men and women.
right.
I find that so, like Julie Bindel is a great example. This is a woman who, no matter what the presenting issue is, cannot let go of her exterminationist level hatred of maleness when she
Yes.
discusses these issues. I really I find that quite striking.
It's amazing. Absolutely
I
amazing.
wondered, Tom, if I can come on to two interrelated things, biology and the perceived size of this issue. There's a very good book called "We Are Our Brains" by Dick Swab, a Dutch neuroscientist, and he states that male to female transsexuality occurs in 1 in 10,000 individuals. female to male transsexuality, 1 in 30,000 individuals. Now, I should say at this point that there are other people who put it higher. And he explains that the differentiation of our sex organs takes place in the first month of pregnancy, but the sexual differentiation of the brain only occurs in the second half of pregnancy. So you can imagine how genuine transgenderism, if you like, comes about, but it's very rare. And he reports studies. This is going back to 2013, I think, his book, showing evidence of female pattern brains in male to female transsexuals and male pattern brains in female to male transsexuals.
Yes.
Now, this all begs the obvious point that if true transgenderism is that rare, how has this become such a huge phenomenon? And I think the old expression "follow the money" comes to mind. You know, just as we have an MGM industry, we have an abortion industry, we have a domestic violence industry, we have a rape industry. We also have a transgender industry, and there are not countless, but vast numbers of doctors and therapists who are making big bucks out of this.
Huge. Billions. I saw a video the other day, Mike, of this woman who was a hospital administrator explaining to the doctors in this group setting how much money they'd make if they did these operations. They said $40,000 each. We need to think about this. This is the way we're going to make more money. Oh, God. It was like that's all they were thinking about was how much they're going to make, not thinking about the well-being of their patients. Absolutely incredible.
The medical profession and the psychology profession, they should be hanging their heads in shame at this.
Really, especially the psychological profession. I can't believe people are pushing this. Mm-hmm. It's just, I did an interview with 2 trans men, I guess it was 3 or 4 years ago now. I loved these guys, but these were guys who from the time they were born, they knew something was different in them. And they didn't make any kind of physical changes until they were adults. When they did, it felt like the right thing. I did 2 videos with them. I loved them, and it was fascinating to hear what their perspective of things. Very thoughtful, very interesting men. I'll put a link to those interviews below if people are interested. But that's not what we're seeing today. You know, this lightning fast change in surgery is just so evil. It's just evil. And you see what happens. I mean, see after the surgeries, you know, a year or 2 later, people are going, what did I do? You know, this is horrible. What did I do to my body? Now I'm a nothing.
Even those who haven't had the surgery. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mike. I was just going to say, even those who don't have the surgery, but take the very high concentrations of hormones, those have some irreversible effects, and many are being taken in such doses that nobody actually knows what the long-term consequences can be. And to think that healthy, very young people, age 15 in many cases, are being encouraged to take those hormones, which will render them sterile, do all sorts of other things, changes to their body, change their voice, pitch, everything that many things that can't be changed. It's terrible to think that is being encouraged in such young people.
It's unbelievable. And most countries, Australia, Finland, Sweden, the UK, Belgium, France, I think, all of those countries have huge restrictions on this. Huge restrictions. But the United States, not restricting it. Where are we going? In the case of the UK,
Tom, that's only very recent.
It's recent, yes. They're the most recent ones. But they're starting to restrict it. Very different from
within the last 12 months. I'd just like to quote Charles Murray on childhood onset gender dysphoria, one of the 3 forms. He says this comes closest to the popular understanding, and it occurs in both girls and boys. It's characterized by behavior typical of the opposite sex from an early age. In the published literature, findings are that the majority, 60 to 90%, of children with this kind of gender dysphoria have become comfortable with their sex of birth by adulthood, and thus have avoided the need for a sex change.
Right.
I guess that was true historically, but these days, a 6, 7, 8-year-old showing signs of it is going to be hugely encouraged.
They call it.
and probably will not become comfortable with the birth of
No, I think
their
the
child.
research says that they will become comfortable. The research says that 88% of boys who practice what they call desistance, which I think means that they they don't change their sex, they just stick with it for a while. By the time they're adults, 88% are reconciled with it. That they're
No, I
okay.
agree, Tom. But what I'm saying is they are now in a culture where the culture and doctors and so on will only affirm that they are of the opposite sex.
Yes, and
Yes.
the sadness is that if they would let them be for a while, they'd probably be okay all on their own. You know, that's why this quick strike, this kamikaze crap of cutting people's body parts off is just insane. It's absolutely insane.
And we see it, I guess, with the Texan father
Oh,
who's trying to
Mr.
stop
Younger,
his, I think,
yeah.
ex-wife chemically castrating their 10-year-old son.
Did they do it?
I don't know, Tom.
Because
I
there was
don't know.
the last I heard was she was trying to get to move to California, and if she does that, it's all over, you know. But he was trying to block it, so yeah.
Yes.
He was even I know the boy when he spent time with his father didn't want to wear girls' clothes.
Right,
He was very happy, you know, and he was happy to have his hair cut short. You know, and the female judge has now ordered that those haircuts have to stop.
Oh God.
You know, you could win.
And if you look at that, I think I looked at this a while back because Paul and I did a video on this guy, and as I remember it, the mother really wanted a female child. That she only had boys, and she wanted a girl so bad. And this is a part of what's going on, I'm sure. You know, this crazy stuff.
Well, I have also heard, and this is just completely anecdotally, so take it for that, but that quite a few mothers, I've not heard of a father, but it may be possible too, act out a desire to have a trans child because it's another way of getting validation for their own, you know, goodness and virtue as mothers. To have a trans child now and to be very pro-trans and supporting your child through their transition is a way for these mothers to get a lot of validation and attention from their friends, from the people at the school, and everything else. So a lot of I've heard only about mothers, but actually find this a way to get support for themselves.
That's interesting. You know, I think the fathers are more insulated from this stuff. You know, I think that's a good point. That it's the mothers who are kind of looking for the status, looking for the way to become, you know, like the group, you know, to be alike, to be adored. And
it seems like it might be
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems like it might be a kind of version of Munchausen by proxy syndrome.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think the men are
also virtue signaling, surely.
Yes.
Yes. And you know, I want to be sure that we mention that Janice has done 2 articles on the trans issue. One, girls who transition are victims, boys who transition are victimizers. And then Leah Thomas is the child of feminism. That was a great one. Both of them are really good, and I highly recommend you have a look at those on Janice's Substack, which you need to go join immediately. You know, there's going to be things there you find that you won't find anyplace else. Anyway.
Both of them fantastic articles. Can you just put the last one back there, Tom, please?
The last one back there, Tom. This one?
Has the expression "a picture tells 1,000 words" ever been more appropriate?
Right.
Yeah. Look at Leah. She's a biggie.
Massive, towering person. Yeah.
He must be twice the weight of those 2 girls.
You would think so. You would think so. And, you know, we're going to do an interview. I'm going to do, maybe somebody will join me, with the researcher for exercise stuff. What's his name? Dr. What's Jim's name? Nooner or something like that. But he's going to talk about... Thank you. Yes. He's going to talk about the fact that even the biochemical consistency of male and female muscles are different. Yeah, it's going to be a good one.
2 final points from me, if I might.
Go ahead, Doug.
One is, like, with regard to the castration of this young boy, I think Janice did a Fiamengo file or wrote something a year or so ago, there was a BC father of a daughter from a divorced or separated family, and he had learned his 11-year-old daughter, unbeknownst to him, and with that, never mind with his not with his approval, but without his knowledge, was taking hormone blockers and
Oh
so on.
God.
Tried to go to court to get us stopped. The mother was totally supportive, and he was banned from speaking publicly about the issue by the BC Court of Appeal. And
Wow.
when he spoke out anyway to try to save his daughter, he was actually jailed. So
Yeah.
things are that extreme. The other
Yes.
point I wanted to make is following up on slight pun, uh, Mike's point about following the money. To follow, I'd like to follow John Money a little bit
Right.
because as I
Oh
recall, he was
yeah.
one of the first to get this stuff going,
Yes. Yes.
and this one clip hits quite close to home in a literal way because his victim was from my hometown of
Really?
Winnipeg, of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Yes,
Huh.
so it ended up getting a lot of play there, and this is an illustration of the lie, not just of theory, but the lie of fact in the lie about facts in an individual case. And what had happened, as I understand it, or recall it, there were two, I think they were twin boys,
Right.
and through an electronic circumcision machine, one boy's penis got burnt off.
Right.
So the parents were advised to raise him as a girl.
Right.
And so, right from the get go, he was raised as a girl. And John Money reported, like, oh, yes, the parents treated him differently. His brother stopped tripping him and started helping him up instead. And when he had fallen on his own, and everything was wonderful and everything was good, minor things here and there, but everything was wonderful. Well, it finally came out. I believe this young man's name was Reimer, and not that withstanding that intervention from the get go, he always sensed something was wrong.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the most poignant, or the two most poignant things to me, was when he was becoming a teen and tried to use makeup. He looked in the mirror and said, I just felt and looked like a clown. It
Huh.
just wasn't him because he's a boy.
Huh.
And then when he found out what happened, um, then there was at least some relief. He married as a man. He married I think a woman with two kids. Of course, they couldn't have sexual relations or any child of their own, but there was a documentary on it that played
Yeah.
big in Winnipeg, especially because he uh, was from there, and he talked about how his life was destroyed, but at least he had this marriage and stepkids and all that. But he did end up, as they say, self-deleting ultimately anyway.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and this movie was going around lying about the success, even in a
Mm-hmm.
specific individual
Yeah.
case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a
Yeah. And in
crazy
fact,
story.
I was just going to say that Kate Millett in Sexual Politics relies very heavily on Money's
Really?
sexological expertise
Is that
to
right?
claim, yes, to claim that research that he has done and his colleagues with what she called intersex patients
Right.
proved that how one was raised had a much, was absolutely determinative of one's gender identity, quite apart from one's genitalia and biological sex. And yeah, it was, I don't know if it was all a lie, but certainly in that case, it's
Oh.
known that Money lied about
Yes.
the success
Oh boy.
of that poor little boy raised as a girl who eventually killed himself, and his brother died as well
Right.
as a result of drug taking.
Yeah.
So maybe a kind of suicide or a death of despair anyway. And
Oh
so both
boy.
those the two twins who were such a wonderful experiment for Money to promote his theories, they both ended up dead.
Yep.
So
Now, I
it's
read the book, and
dangerous
man,
stuff.
that was one of the saddest books I think I've ever read. Oh my
Me
gosh.
too. Yeah.
Just unbelievable story. Oh. Are we nearing the end?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I
We're
mean, it's a
about
huge
there.
topic, but
It is, and there's so much we didn't cover, but we got quite a bit done, and it's been fascinating. I've really enjoyed
yeah.
being with you all today.
Yeah, me
And,
too. And I mean, I think the thing that really bothers me about the issue is that it is so difficult to have frank discussions about it. And it's shocking to see how the gender empathy gap seems to play out even when those discussions do take place, so that we're not actually dealing with the issues, all these prejudices about
Yes.
female innocent victimization and male predatory aggression end up being superimposed on the lives of people dealing with these issues.
Yes.
That's really shocking to me.
It is. It's a crazy, crazy issue altogether. And as we always say near the end, men
Are
Good.
It's easy with 4 people, eh?
And so is Janice.
And so is Janice. There you go. Alrighty. So thank you all very much. Go see Janice on the Substack. Go see Mike at his
Please.
site. And Mike, what's the URL?
j4mb.org.uk.
j4mb.org.uk. Come see me at menaregood.locals.com. And Don, we're waiting for yours. And we'll see you then.
Okay.
Men are good. Y'all take care. Men are good, as are you.